Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. My name is Andrew, and I want to introduce you to my 3.5 favorite decks of tarot cards. Um, so, and I want to tell you why they're my favorite 3.5 decks. I own a fair amount of different decks, but I only use 3 of them practically. The half deck, which I don't even have a copy of here, would of course be the Rider-Waite Smith tarot deck, which for a long time has been the plain vanilla uh, tarot deck that many to most people are familiar with the imagery on because it's been around for so long. When I first got it, it was still being called the Rider-Waite Tarot deck because nobody felt like acknowledging the artist, Pamela Coleman Smith, who was a very talented, besides artist, occultist in her own right, probably more in a lot of ways than Arthur Edward Waite, for who, shall we say, provided the symbolic basis for the cards in the deck. What I think makes a tarot deck usable and good, primarily any system of divination, whatever your theory of divination is, this is not to explain necessarily how divination works, but you have a medium, be it a deck of tarot cards, a set of runes, that which goes together to form the hexagrams of the I Ching, or a pencil and paper, or a box of sand for geomancy. Even a pendulum is a medium. And this is that upon which the divine, if you will, and I will, impresses itself to reveal itself to you. Now, how exactly that occurs, I will leave as an exercise for you to decide for yourself. Your own answer may change many, many times over the course of a lifetime. So the key thing with a system of divination or a medium of divination is that you are looking for the configuration of the universe. Therefore, it must be a microcosm. It must contain symbols or the capacity to represent everything that is manifest and unmanifest. And that's a tall order. I mean, you say, yeah, Andrew, how does your pendulum represent the entire universe? And every speck of everything represents the entire universe. But you're right. Pendulum can give maybe yes or no answers, or it can help you bracket a time period, but it's not going to, for example, give you the richness and nuance of answers that a geomantic figure or an I Ching hexagram or a tarot card is going to do. So, first, then, you must have a picture of the universe in some form. And these decks, these other 3 decks here, and the Rider-Waite Smith, all I have come to agree that they, in and of themselves, internally consistently are complete. They describe the universe within their own systems, which does vary from deck to deck, which I'll get into a little bit. Mostly since the late 1800s and the Golden Dawn, we have had a somewhat shoplifted schema for the universe called the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, which is shoplifted from esoteric Judaism, and all of the early members of the Golden Dawn shoehorned an awful lot into that tree, including the tarot deck. That might have been Eliphas Levi, Alphonse Louis Constant's idea to say, hey, we've got 22 of these cards. There's 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Let's make them kiss. Okay. And whether or not that is artificial, and to a certain degree it is, and limiting to a certain degree it also is, it does provide for a map that you can use to improve your memory of what these cards mean, and to extrapolate meanings from the cards that are not necessarily evident from the imagery or from what you've learned in the little white book that comes along with. So we can discuss the mechanics and ethics of appropriation at a later date. It is outside the scope of this video, but I thought I would acknowledge it. So then, how do you get a representation of the universe? Well, again, it's the microcosm, macrocosm thing, right? These decks are all universal because they are so personal. Each of the, whether it's a single artist working in the case of two of these decks, or whether it was collaboration, the effort that has gone into understanding and conveying an understanding of the meaning of each individual card in the picture on the card, or the information on the card, is that's a very personal process, and it takes, to me, you can see through each of these decks that occurred. It wasn't just someone saying, oh, this is the correspondence for Saturn, so yeah, this has to go on this card, and we're gonna put this Hebrew letter there because that's also on the table. I mean, you can do that, and you're just gonna end up with like an I Spy picture, which to me is an aesthetic nightmare. And that's another thing that I want out of my tarot decks, is that I want to be able to look at them without throwing up. And it's very important to me that they have aesthetic value. Even if an individual card is ugly, its ugliness has to have a meaning and fit within the unified theme of the entire deck. So, and that's the whole Solve et Coagula, and that's the whole descent of spirit into matter, and ascending again with the knowledge obtained through experience. You get someone living their life, or performing ritual and scrying to get the meanings of these individual cards, and then distilling it into the image on the card, and then putting that all back together. That is, in itself, the process is the mirror of someone's spiritual development. So, that being said, we will start with the deck that started off my spiritual development, the Thoth deck, which some people refer to as the Crowley-Harris deck. And at one point they just said the Crowley-Thoth deck because, again, apparently the artist, especially if she's a woman, is not important. Thankfully, we've moved on a little bit from such days, and we recognize that maybe the person who did all the art has a certain degree of importance. As a matter of fact, I think the book that Lamila Duquette put together on the Book of Thoth Tarot is excellent at elucidating the part of the thought process that Lady Frida Harris went through to birth these cards, if you will permit me to use that analogy of conception and birth. Of course, the symbols on them conform to ideas that Crowley had, but if you've ever seen any of his paintings, you wouldn't necessarily want to look at a deck that he drew. I'm sorry, or maybe you would, but I wouldn't. As a matter of fact, there is a book that written before the cards were put together, were designed, that is the Book of Thoth, that explains in painful detail all of the symbolism that goes into this deck. Some of the symbolism may not even appear on the cards, and some people have tried very hard to look for it, and with varying degrees of success. This is not how you start your occult career, but it might be how I started. A certain path of mine was getting that book, reading that book, not having even a deck in my possession. And then I went out and eventually when I could, I bought this deck. It was still in the red and white OTO box at that time. And that box, by the way, if I still have bits of it somewhere, it died a long time ago. Because I carried this deck for a long time, since I was about 15 years old, and I still have it. And unlike most people's Thoth decks, mine doesn't look like it's been through a war, which I don't understand, because I've used them, over a period of decades. But I came to the Book of Thoth and the Thoth deck, and a lot of the symbolism in the Book of Thoth comes from a series of visions that Aleister Crowley and Victor Newberg had and recorded, assembled in a text called The Vision and the Voice, which at that time I couldn't get a published copy of. I was not a rich teen, so there were text files, the Bill Heydrich text files, and I formatted that in WordPerfect or Microsoft Publisher, as a matter of fact. Printed it out and bound my own book version, which is, I don't remember if it was public domain at the time, but I've paid for Gems of the Equinox since, so I think I'm covered. That's not the way around you want to do it. Get Lamila Duquette's book, because powering your way through the Book of Thoth without understanding point one about Thelema or any of the symbolism in it is just going to leave you confused and spinning like this. So I thought I'd show you a few of these cards. This is the Star. Blessing and worship to the lovely star. And Art, which replaced Temperance, it was called in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. The meaning is slightly different. Here's the entire process by which these decks are created, illustrated in one card. The Seven of Cups, Debauch, one of my favorites. Again, an ugly card to look at, but its meaning is just conveyed immediately as soon as you see that picture. And the Tower, look at that. What else did I have in here? So that I don't run afoul of anyone's copyright, I will only be showing a certain portion of these cards in any deck. And I encourage you, if you like these decks, to go and find and purchase a copy of your own. Now, for a long time, I just stuck to the Thoth deck because other decks, like the Rider-Waite-Smith, had slightly different correspondences than, and I very, very strongly have an attachment to Crowley's correspondences because of how I learned the tarot correspondences from the Book of Thoth. You may not be in that boat. You should come and join me in this boat though, because it's the right boat. It's pretty cool. This I'm even going to show you the bag because it came with a wonderful bag. This is the Urban Tarot by an artist named Robin Scott, and this took her about 10 years to complete. So it is definitely Thoth based. You've got art in there, and you've got the minor cards very much having the same meanings as they are given in the Thoth deck. The difference here, another example of the personal becoming the universal, is that they are New York City based, and everyone on Earth thinks they're from New York City because they've seen Toronto in films. However, because New York City is the setting of so many films and so much of our popular fiction, it becomes that thing which is known as, name a city. Oh, London, New York, Paris, right? So, by the very fact that there is a city of the universe quality to New York, this becomes a universal deck. It wouldn't be the same way if you were to create a deck for like a city like Montreal. Very personal to me, but are you going to see something and recognize it? Maybe only if you're familiar with it. Here, the chances are that you will, and I think this is executed perfectly. I want to show a couple of cards that illustrate my point. The Four of Cups, luxury, and the meaning, the feeling is conveyed immediately the moment that you see this card. Here is art. You may not be able to see that very well. Some of the art here is very intricate, and you could blow one of these up, and I think there are still prints for sale, or there were at one point, where you could get like wall art of it. And I'm very bad at choosing one out of 78 things, so I never got one. There's the Eon, which replaces what was known as Judgment in the Rider-Waite-Smith and non-Thoth decks usually, and you can see, it conveys it. I had to read up on exactly what we were seeing here, and you may not be able to see clearly the person in the present touching an ancestor, perhaps through that. So it's the whole Ellis Island experience, apparently. Speaking of unmistakable images, this is the only deck that could have pulled this off, and it's absolutely correct. And here's good old death, complete with the imagery of creating new life. And what's interesting for the court cards, the King, Queen, Jack, except in tarot decks, because for various reasons there are 4 court cards per suit, having different names in different decks, but often you'll get King, Queen, Prince and Princess, or something along those lines. Here, they've each been given a persona, which kind of makes them easier to a persona or an occupation, I would say, which makes it easier to read them off the bat, in my opinion. It may also limit them. I'm terrible with court cards. A lot of the time they will have me running back to the books. The images on the Thoth deck help me, but otherwise I have yet to fully internalize the interplay of the four elements with the four elements. I'm a slow learner sometimes. So that's the Urban Tarot. Really one of the most, and if you're looking for a deck that's modern and a little bit more diverse than, I'm not going to say it's very, but a little bit more, that's definitely a path to go down. Now, you may have realized that I have a comfort zone when it comes to tarot. The comfort zone is pretty strictly delineated by the parameters of the Thoth deck, because that's what I learned with first, and I found it easier to become an intuitive reader by working through a relatively rigid system of correspondences. The astrological correspondences of the cards helped me learn a little bit more astrology. The Kabbalistic correspondences of the cards illustrated to me the tree of life and the four worlds. And as you study this, you build it up into your body of light. You build it up into your aura. It just becomes a part of you, so that you can say, oh yeah, Geber on Mars, it's red, it's over here. This is when I'm doing the Kabbalistic cross, I can see exactly what's going on and what should be in between all these things. So there are a lot of aspects to tarot beyond just figuring out, does he love me? Well, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, maybe he will later, maybe it's the wrong question. So to go out of my comfort zone, this is the Tarot of the Silicon Dawn, designed by Egypt Irnash, which I really should have looked up the exact pronunciation of earlier. Oops, I'm sure she won't mind. Now, this is not a traditional 78 card deck. I forget how many cards there are in here. There are extra suits, sort of. There are about 4 different fools, and a couple of almost blank cards, one that has the same front as the back, so I don't even have to show it to you. Oh, it looks like that. The traditional 4 suits are all in there, and the idea is you can take or leave whichever cards that you want. There is a juxtaposition of the elemental attributions between the wands and the discs, which is an entirely different elemental switcheroo from the one I learned as a kid when I was reading Techniques of High Magic, how to get everything backwards. But it's internally consistent, and it keeps the meanings of the cards. So although it's not how I would have done it, I can work within it when I'm working with this deck. If you ever see me pull out this deck for your reading, it means I think that you are weird. No, it means I think that the question may go outside of the parameters of what I would normally look at in a Thoth deck reading. Yeah, and that's about as far down that path as I'm going to go. This is the card that sold the deck to me, was the 99 of Swords, for obvious reasons. Well, they're obvious to me anyways. Yeah, here is the extra suit, the Void suit. And you may not even be able to see that unless I tilt it a little bit, and then I'm not even sure. It's black on black, but it's embossed. So if the light hits it the right way, you can see what the image is. And that adds an element of void, but an extra element of depth to this deck and the readings that you can get out of it. Again, a favorite of mine, the Seven of Cups, which really does convey exactly the meaning. That debauch is right there, and the motion in these cards is amazing. Here is death. Here's the star. Very different, very beautiful cards. Here we have Judgment rather than the Eon, and it's been given a new interpretation that is very similar to the description on the Rider-Waite-Smith. What am I looking for? I wasn't going to make this long, but if you've stuck around this long, thank you. And you can see most of these online. Yeah, there's alternate major arcana that just don't exist. History just don't exist. Well, they exist in this deck. History as contrasted with fortune, which you would normally see as the 10th trump. But fortune is in here too. So really you can get this experience out of reading with this deck that destales your readings, as far as I'm concerned. It's very much like when I was learning to play guitar, which I still do, badly, at about the same time that I was learning to read tarot. And I had an electric guitar that, if you've ever played guitar, you know that an electric guitar is fairly easy to play. You know, it's got a small neck. The strings are generally flexible and that sort of thing. Whenever I would find that I couldn't progress any further, like I was playing the same thing over and over again, and it just wasn't really getting any better with it, I wasn't learning anything new, I would put it down and I would pick up the Spanish classical guitar that my mother had behind her chair and try to play that for a while. And of course, I'd play different things. Usually wouldn't be playing, well, I could play the intro to some Metallica on it, but because it was harder to press down these rigid strings, had a much wider neck, the frets were further apart. I didn't have 24 frets to play with, so I had to figure out what I was doing. This all taught me by doing it, by making it harder on myself. Then I would go back to my electric guitar. Suddenly I was all better at it, you know? And I think it's the same way very much with tarot cards or any system of divination. That if you feel yourself, or any practice really, that if you feel yourself stagnating with it, switch it up, try a different tool, and then you can come back to your existing tools with a whole new set of capabilities that you developed from working with a different tool. So I hope that you have enjoyed me showing you a bit of 3 of my 3.5 favorite decks to work with. I do have others that I like and that I like to look at, but these are the ones that have served me practically and will continue to do so for at least until I get bored again. But I doubt that will happen anytime soon. So if you've watched this far, and I hope you have, blessings of the winter solstice be upon you, unless you're in the southern hemisphere, in which case blessings of the summer solstice be upon you. And love is the law, love under will.